Welcome to Frankly Speaking, the podcast on responsible business from Frank Bold, the European public interest law firm. I'm Richard Howitt, and after many years leading discussions on responsible business issues inside the European Parliament, I host our discussions of the latest developments in corporate sustainability, sustainable finance, business and human rights. Today, for some, moving to net zero is more difficult than for others. Yet the world needs high energy intensive industries like steel and concrete to be able to do so if the battle against climate change is to be won. What are the challenges for these sectors and how can they be overcome? To discuss this, I'm pleased to welcome Antonín Šámal, Research Fellow at AMO Klima, the think tank, the Association for International Affairs, and Jiří Mravec, Head of Innovation and Transformation at Třinec Steelworks from Czechia, but also with operations in Poland and Hungary. Antonín, welcome to Frankly Speaking.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And a warm welcome to you too, Jiří.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, Antonín, the European Commission, with some fanfare, unveiled its global climate and energy vision, the Clean Industrial Deal. So helping European industries to be able to transform to low carbon is high up on the political priority list in Brussels. But what is your assessment of that approach and how it will work?
So after a couple of years of focusing primarily on the Green Deal agenda, which was mainly on the climate response, now the industry is calling for support. After they started struggling with energy costs and emission prices, the Commission has come up with a plan to A, lower the energy prices, and B, to support the market for green products. However, it is highly questioned if it is enough both to achieve the decarbonization goals and to help with European competitiveness, just highlighted as a major issue last year by Mario Draghi's report. 1 year after the report, industry is still calling for support, and activists are saying that the EU is not on track to meet its decarbonization plans.
So industry and climate activists are both cross and thinking that it's failing. Jiří, from the point of view of your company, we'll drill down into some of the detail a bit later in the podcast, but just give us a broad overview of your decarbonisation pathway, where you are on that journey, and is the European action really going to make a difference to you and your company?
So Třinecké železárny, the company that you can see behind me, we are currently producing high quality steel from iron ore and coal. We have blast furnaces, and this technology has a certain emission intensity. Over the past 20-30 years of perfecting this technology, we have reached a certain maturity of emission intensity that cannot be further decreased. I think we are among other European producers the least emission intensive using this way of production. But obviously we need to decrease this emission intensity more if we are to reach the European goals. The key projects for that are the change of primary steelmaking operations, so going towards producing steel on an electric arc furnace, mostly from steel scrap, so recycling steel, rather than producing prime virgin steel. And also for our power plant that we have here on site, we need to exit coal and the metallurgical gases that they now use to produce energy. So these two large projects, electric arc furnace and going to other lower carbon sources such as gas or hydrogen. These are the two key projects. They are now technically prepared, but we are awaiting, let's say, the conditions that need to be in place to really realize these investments to be able to finance them. So these are the two key projects, and that's where we are now. I think I'll explain later why we and other steel producers are a bit stuck at this point with the transformation efforts.
Well, perhaps I can ask you on that straight away, because I know recently you set back the target for achieving your Green for Steel programme from 2028 to 2030. So you're clearly suffering from some of the uncertainty that's around at the minute. I don't want to put words into your mouth. What are some of those factors that are holding you and similar companies back?
Yeah, exactly. As you said, it's not just us, but we see a lot of delays or cancellation or struggles of the projects that are already being built up. And this is caused by the situation that is now happening in the steel industry, basically from 2019, 2020. When the Green Deal was announced, it seemed easier to accomplish than it is now. After 2019, we have to realize that we have had a series of crisis years. First, it was COVID with a huge demand slump and all the other complications. And then in 2022, came the Ukraine war and a huge shock impact on energy and also on other costs. And since 2023, basically all the steelmakers are struggling, are in a crisis due to these cost shocks and also due to increasing imports that are being pushed into Europe, especially after Trump's tariffs as well. So we are being hit by the revenue and cost side, and we are now, as the other steelmakers, we are in a survival mode, and we need to see a more positive outlook in front of us to be able to start doing these huge capex investments, because steel is a very hard to abate industry in terms of emissions, and the technologies that are there are quite costly. So we need a positive outlook, the way out of the crisis, to start breathe again, to be able to afford indulging in the transformational projects.
One more to you, Jiří. What would convince your company that positive outlook is there? What sorts of signs would there be to enable you to think, yes, we can do this investment?
Yeah, I think I always say it's like a piece of the puzzle. Whichever piece of the puzzle is missing, you don't do the investment. And we see that. We see that, capex subsidy is not enough. For instance, some companies are declining capex subsidies only. So these conditions, roughly speaking, there are 3 or 4 key conditions. First, we need to have a positive outlook on the market demand. So the European industry, our customers, have to be doing well. It's also linked to the energy cost, but they have to be doing well. And we need to have a protected market from the overcapacity of the steel coming mostly from the Asia. So this is a necessary step. Second, we need a relief on energy costs. We need affordable energy prices 24/7. Not saying on the level of the US costs or other, but not 3 times, not 4 times as high. And we need to see a positive outlook for the availability of their energy. And yes, capex subsidies are a necessary part. You need to get some money for the huge capex, for the brownfield project capex from the government or from the European funds, because the capex is too huge for the companies and their balance sheets and financing opportunities to be able to finance themselves. So you need both capex and opex conditions, and then these projects are bankable and financeable. The fourth condition could be some green steel premium or a demand for green steel, which currently we do not see there is on the market, especially not for our products. But this could also be a positive motivational factor. I'm sure that if these 3 or 4 conditions are in place, and we are able to afford it, and also the banks are willing to finance such projects.
Again, I want to come back to some of the things you raised there, but Antonín, listening to that, what's your perspective about where the sector as a whole stands and the sorts of solutions that are needed if decarbonisation is to go ahead?
The industry is fairly clear on the issues, and it seems that the European Commission sees them. The Clean Industrial Deal has outlined these issues that need to be solved, exactly as Jiří mentioned. For example, with demand for green materials such as green steel, the Clean Industrial Deal aims to create green steel markets, so-called lead markets. For example, with public procurement, minimal requirements for green and EU-made materials. However, these are still fairly far ahead. And all of these plans are largely based on member states' implementation. And so the European Commission is, to some extent, not exercising all of its potential in supporting the transition and in supporting the industry. And it is leaving the responsibility on the member states themselves, which very often are either too small, both organizationally and fiscally, or they have their own internal agendas and issues. And at the same time, they're also competing against each other. So it may be difficult to become a leader in decarbonization if it is exactly as was mentioned, very capex intensive and requires a lot of strategy instead of, for example, just simply supporting of the current processes.
And obviously there's been a recent change of government in Czechia, and using that as a sort of case example, what sorts of signals is the new government sending about what it might do in this field?
So that is part of the problem when the government is not very clear on their both support on the industry and the transition, with some of the parties directly questioning the fact that there is a climate change and we need to decarbonize. They are sending mixed signals to both the industry and our international partners on whether we take it seriously and if we will actually make the changes necessary. However, the emission trading scheme is, of course, still in place, and the emissions will need to be paid for when the free allowances are, the level is decreasing. The upcoming government, if it actually is formed the way it seems to be formed, because it has not yet been finalized, it's not very clear on how and what it will be able to support the industry with, except one thing, likely incoming Ministry of Industry is proposing to lower the regulated portion of the electricity for especially energy intensive industries. However, it is yet to be seen where the money would come from, because it is, of course, in the orders of billions of euros per year.
And Jiří, that issue of the price of energy is crucial for you and your sector, isn't it? And can you know, consumers are crying out about the price of fuel bills, but you as high energy intensive users, it's absolutely crucial to your competitiveness. What needs to change in order to be able to fulfill the decarbonisation pathway?
Exactly, as you said, as a large energy consumer, especially electricity, we are exposed to its price much more. So if it doubles in price, it basically erases our profit, just like a household that is living on the edge. So it's very important for us, and looking into the future, meaning that basically decarbonization of a lot of the heavy industry or transport is basically about electrification. So we are going to increase electricity consumption. So it's becoming even more of a cost factor in the future if we switch to technologies and replace, fossil-based technologies with electricity-based technologies. So it will only increase in importance. And what needs to be done, I think, is that the electricity first has to be available 24/7. Obviously, for a heavy industry, this needs to be in place. We cannot run purely on renewables. We need a stable grid. These technologies are very large, and we need a reasonable price and a price mechanism that is first predictable, that there are no extreme price shocks, and that's at least in line what the other European countries have. Indeed, as of now, there is no European price, and we can see with the theme, as Antonín said, the theme of the Commission is to leave it to the member states how they distribute the distribution costs, support for renewables, etc. So what we are seeing and what we are a bit afraid of is that there will be, German price, Austrian price, French price, Swedish price, and a Czech price for electricity, and they will differ. For competitiveness reasons and for level playing field, we would like the prices in Europe to be obviously a bit lower, but to be roughly the same. I mean, they don't have to be at the level of the US or Chinese prices if we have a protected market, but we really need to get them a little bit down where the steel is affordable for our customers, and we need it available 24/7.
As you talk about the protected market there, let's just delve a bit more into that. So the tariff wars have been going on. President Trump has announced 50% tariffs against steel imports to the United States. The European Union has done the same, but for excess steel flooding into the market, particularly China, they say has over-subsidized steel, and they believe that that is WTO or Trade Organization compliant to do that. So your company is caught amidst an international trade war that's going on. What's your perception about that, where it's going and how it affects you?
Yeah, it affects us. There is a direct impact on the European export to the US, which is not that large actually, but we are more afraid of the indirect impact. So basically a redirection of the imports that went into the US to Europe, and that's what we are seeing now, especially in the last two or 3 years. And it will impact us because unlike electricity, for instance, steel can be transported freely. You can import it from wherever from the world, and these low-priced imports then set the price benchmark also for our product. So it's very hard for us to compete with such imports if it's for dumped prices, let's say also. And we have heard, or the European Commission has introduced at the beginning of October a proposal for some safeguard mechanisms for steel products, not for steel semi-products, but for steel products. But the idea is fine. I think we have to protect against this overcapacity. The idea is okay, and it's actually quite radical. It's introducing some of the rules that we have asked for a long time. But we need to make sure that we close the loopholes so that our downstream industry also doesn't suffer, for instance. And we need to make sure that the implementation of these changes is fast. The issue I have with the Clean Industrial Deal or Steel and Metals Action Plan is not the lack of vision or the topics and the issues that are addressed there, but the timelines. We are in the crisis for 3 years and we need to pay salaries every month. And we are living in a world of urgency, whereas the Commission sometimes comes with proposals for next year and for next year. Even this steel market protection, it's supposed to take place only in July 2026 if it's agreed by the Parliament, etc. So the idea is usually fine with the EU. They are reconciling with this industry struggle, but the timeline is often an issue. But overall, we as a steelmaker, as a local steelmaker, we are supporting the market protection. I think it needs to be there.
Antonín, for these industries to be able to decarbonise needs technological changes which aren't present today, but we're all working out and planning to be there in the next years. How important is that technological innovation as part of the necessary pathway and decarbonisation for these industries?
That is the right question, and given the long-term outlook for the industrial decarbonization, technological change still has some time to actually influence the future of the decarbonization plans. So it is important to invest in research and development and pilot plants, for example. And when we look at the not only steel but the other sectors such as cement production and chemicals, there will be much greater need for green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage. And exactly these technologies and the infrastructure that would support them is not yet in place, but also the plans are very unclear. And this is one of the critical roles of the governments and the EU as such, to enable the industrialists to count with the availability of green hydrogen and CCS and carbon storage infrastructure itself. Other than that, there are still lots of process emissions which would need tackling, and there is a lot of space for innovation. However, it doesn't always have to happen in every country individually. So it would make sense for individual governments to invest in some pilot projects and then just take the innovations from abroad and not necessarily reinvent the wheel.
Do you mind, Jiří, if I ask you to talk about carbon capture and storage and green hydrogen? We'll do it one by one. So starting with carbon capture and storage, how much is that an important part of your strategy and what are you doing to pursue it?
So carbon capture, utilization or storage is not part of our short-term or medium-term strategy, nor do I see any other steelmaker doing it apart from one company that has run a pilot plant in Belgium, but will probably shut it down due to economic reasons. From my perspective and our company perspective, the CCUS should be the final technology for the very final emissions, process emissions that we are not able to eliminate by direct electrification or by other sensible technological changes, so to say, that have their business case. But the technology for capture is there, but it costs something. And obviously a private company will always look at the CapEx and OpEx of these investments. And as of now, it does not really make much sense to do a large-scale carbon capture, especially because utilization is not seen as a permanent storage, and storage is a project for 20 years, I would say, from looking for a suitable site, doing the seismological testing, etc., and then transporting our compressed CO2 to these storages. So I see it as a long-term process. There should be R&D done. We are also trying to actively work with local players to map out possible storage sites, but it will take 10, 15 years to develop them. And I think that in 20, 25 years, we will not pump there all our emissions and use this as an end of the stack solution, but we will only use it for a final 10%, 5-10% of the emissions that are very hard to abate, eliminate otherwise. And regarding hydrogen, I think there is a big sobering up now in Europe and in steel industry. A lot of the hydrogen projects are being cancelled or delayed because simply the economics of the green hydrogen, especially for steel making in the large amounts that it needs, does not add up, especially not in the Central Europe. And we see that there will probably be some of locations in the world that may have good conditions for green hydrogen production, where they can get to a reasonable OpEx and where they can use hydrogen for iron ore reduction and hence to decarbonize our process. But these will be very specific cases. And I think the build out of hydrogen-based plants in Europe, we already know it now, it will not be as expected and drawn out in 2019 or 2021. So hydrogen is also not part of our strategy simply due to the fact that we are not a region that will have surplus cheap renewable electricity, and therefore to invest in hydrogen does not make sense. We are a region that is more suited to scrap-based production since this is historically accumulated here in the industrial region.
There'll be listeners who are advocates of both of those technologies who will be disappointed to hear you say that, but we're glad that you're honest and tell us your appraisal. But is moving to scrap-based, some would say circular economy type approach, is that really going to be enough? Does that have the potential to be enough to drive down emissions to the degree that is needed?
It will not be enough. I think it can help to eliminate a lot of emissions. I think we can get to a similar share of scrap-based and iron ore-based production like in the US, for instance. In the US, I think 80% of steel production is based on electric arc furnaces, scrap-based. So I think we can get there, but we'll still need some virgin material. And for that, I think we will either still use the blast furnaces or obviously the hydrogen reduction. But what will happen is something that is decoupling. It's called decoupling of iron making and steel making. Currently our operations and other European steel makers that use our technology, they are, so to say, integrated. They were built out at one place where there was coal. But what will happen with the switch to hydrogen-based reduction, if it succeeds, is that the hydrogen and iron ore hubs will be co-located somewhere in the favorable geographies, and only steel making in the electric arc furnaces will be happen, and the hydrogen reduced iron will be brought here in the form of briquettes. It's simply the fact that the iron making, the reduction part, energy intensive, and the steel making part will decouple probably, and what will be left in Europe is just the steel making and rolling, but the iron making, the hydrogen reduction will take place in places where it makes sense, and it will be transported from there as a bulk material. So this is a trend that's been spoken about in the industry, and there are hydrogen hubs appearing on the map of the world.
Antonín, on other technologies that are needed and may contribute to this, do you agree with what you just heard from Jiří? Are there any other technological approaches that should be pursued, are being pursued?
I agree with what Jiří said. Exactly, when it comes to the steel production, when it comes to, for example, cement production, it is likely that carbon capture and storage will be needed even more likely. And there are some pilot projects happening even in the region, such as in Poland. And that is because there are process emissions, which are pretty much impossible to get rid of, although there are ways to lower the emissions approximately by half with cement production, by adding more slag from steel making processes or calcinated clay. However, it still doesn't. The emissions still don't fall to zero, but it should be fairly simple to decarbonize with CCS, which was just very expensive. However, the cement industry is fairly localized, so it doesn't need that much protection from outside of the EU production. It would just mean that concrete will become more expensive, and it will of course need lots of capital investment support from public funds. Then when it comes to hydrogen, it seems most likely that it will be needed in the chemicals industry and in oil refineries, fertilizer production. And the industry in itself is already producing hydrogen, just not just on the green hydrogen. So they will need to work on creating sort of hydrogen hubs, either where it is very easy to do, like Jiří said, or build out renewables wherever the oil refineries are, but the potential is not typically not that great over there. And then, of course, like the infrastructure for that is sort of missing.
That was obviously a slightly more optimistic view than we heard. Jiří, I know you've got strong feelings about what banks and the finance community are and are not doing in this space. Let me invite you to share those with our audience.
Yeah, sure. I mean, speaking from our experience and from the others in the EU steelmaking, and it's not like I would like to criticize the banks. I mean, in the end, they are private companies listed on the stock exchange, and they have their profit KPIs. They are not philanthropic organizations that will finance our projects and our companies for no payback or for no security. But I think that they should reconsider their position in this value chain of decarbonization. I mean, the private banks, but also the European Investment Bank or the ECB Bank, because they are crucial to finance these projects. And as of now, unfortunately, the banks are looking at decarbonization and transformational projects from the typical risk-reward perspective. You know, they see this project as being risky because they are very large in capex size, and they look at our company through the normal criteria, and they see that we have been in crisis for the past 3 years. So they may lend us the money, but they give us a very strict and stringent conditions, which basically means a suicide in a couple of years. So I think there needs to be some push also, or some positive motivation from the regulators, from ECB and EIB, to allow the private banks to finance decarbonization and transformation projects a bit differently than standard project. They should have some priority. They should have longer payback times. They should relieve the companies of all the conditions that are not normal for the standard loans, because otherwise the private shareholders of the companies will see these financing conditions and they will say this may mean suicide in a year or two, and we may not even build these new technologies. We may die while doing so, or while paying back the loan. So we need to make sure that the financing conditions and that the banks and the ECB kind of give us a bit of a relief and understand that these huge transformational capex investments, they need a little bit of a different approach rather than the standard approach.
Thanks. We're nearly at time. So final question to each of you. Antonín first. You're a decarbonisation expert. Go beyond the region, go beyond Europe. How is the world doing with steel, concrete, and these high energy intensive industries? How is the world doing in terms of decarbonisation? Give us that overview.
Two things. One, it is improving in terms of efficiency, and there has been a quite a long-term success in terms of lowering emissions per amount of product produced. However, when it comes to process changes, this is not very successful yet, and for example, pilot products are not being started very in very large scale nowhere in the world, and at the same time, as was mentioned, steel is largely overproduced in the world, and that is still based on blast furnaces with very high emission intensity, both in India or China or in Turkey. When it comes to other technological innovation, Europe is aiming to lead the way. However, now we will see if you will actually get there. Hydrogen and carbon capture and storage are problematic pretty much everywhere in the world. There has been a long series of pilot projects in the US, for example, on carbon capture and storage that has been largely unsuccessful. The large part of industrial decarbonization will be down to electrification, and for that we need large build-out of both grids and renewables, potentially nuclear energy. So that is actually happening pretty much all over the world, and so that's been a large success, which then enables the especially the heating decarbonization in industry with large-scale industrial heat pumps and such.
And last question to you, Jiří. Let's be optimistic that your industry does achieve this. What does a steel making company look like in the year 2050?
I think, well, first of all, there should still be steelmaking, I think, unless our civilization changes. We need it for the climate change technologies and the others. I think a modern electric arc furnace-based steel mill is almost unrecognizable from a logistical center or some huge retail park. It's really a large and modern hall. It's quite automatic. So this is the future I see at some of the plants that we have seen in the US or even in the EU. Using maximum amount of scrap and then bringing in the reduced iron from where it's possible. So I think it should still be there. It will probably not produce as much as historically did. It will not employ as many people, but the value added and the know-how should still be kept, I think, because I think that the industrialization is not reversible, and we should really not lose that know-how. So I hope there will be conditions for the success that I kind of describe, and that the current players will be able to stay on the market, and we keep the know-how and hence some sovereignty in material like steel.
Thank you very much. In this podcast, we've seen that both the industry and climate activists are disappointed at the green industrial deal. It needs to move further and faster. We've seen in Třinec Steelworks that both the replacement of the furnace and lower energy costs are crucial to them achieving the decarbonisation pathway. We heard that a premium for green steel would make a huge difference, equalisation of energy prices, and that if the European Union expects member states to deliver that, it's going to need a huge response for them, given all the pressures upon them. We've heard about the protected market and the tariff war, and support for what Europe has done from Třinec, and we've heard different views about how far both green hydrogen and carbon capture and storage are going to be developed. But Jiří himself has said that he sees it as being part of the last step, but only the last step. We've heard pretty stringent criticism of the banks. Don't commit suicide, please. But the terms in which loans are given to support this decarbonisation, clearly that needs to be looked at. Many pilots we've heard about, but they need to be increased massively in terms of scale. And because so much is based on electrification, how that electricity is generated is a crucial part of this story as well. Sadly, we have come to the end of our podcast, and thank you very much to Jiří Mravec and to Antonín Šámal for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
You've been listening to Frankly Speaking, the Frank Bold podcast on responsible business. Find out more about Frank Bold's Responsible Companies section on our LinkedIn page, or by commenting and give us your feedback on that page, or by commenting via your podcast provider, where we hope you will share this conversation and give this podcast a 5-star rating. Remember, you can watch us on our YouTube channel too. Thank you very much to Jiří and to Antonín and to all of you for listening. See you next time. Goodbye.